The coffee shop was eerily still that morning, a hush born not of calm, but of apprehension. Every patron spoke in whispers. Servers and baristas moved swiftly yet cautiously, and even the constant buzz of the coffee machine seemed muffled, all due to his presence. At the prime table by the window sat Edward Harrington, a name that sparked both awe and fear in the city. He was a wealthy tycoon, notorious not for kindness but for his fiery temper, haughtiness, and unattainable expectations. His arrival in the shop cast a shadow, like a thundercloud dimming the entire space. Everyone knew the tales, how he'd driven workers to tears, shamed supervisors before patrons, and once caused a barista to resign instantly after a single grievance. People dreaded him, and rightly so. If you value compassion, redemption, and the bravery to defend what's just, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Tales Stories. Your support keeps these transformative, inspiring stories alive for you. On that particular day, Edward was in a foul mood. Clad in a crisp navy suit with a flawlessly tied knot, he sat drumming his fingers restlessly on the marble tabletop, his gaze scouring the room for the tiniest flaw. The staff swapped anxious looks, silently urging one another to tread carefully. Nobody wanted to face his fury. When his order arrived, his usual double espresso with a pinch of cinnamon, it took just one sip before his voice thundered across the shop. "This coffee is an insult!" he roared, loud enough for all to hear. The clatter of his cup hitting the saucer rang like a warning bell. Patrons froze mid-bite, and the staff steeled themselves for another public scolding. The manager, a slender man with spectacles, who had faced Edward more times than he cared to recall, hurried over with a nervous smile and a shaky tone. But Edward wasn't appeased by apologies. He demanded to know who brewed the coffee, who cleared it, and why the standards were so shamefully poor. His words dripped with venom, slicing through the air like blades. The barista responsible, a young lad in his first month, stood pale and mute behind the counter, petrified. That's when she stepped in. Sophie, the new server, had only been there a week. She wasn't aware of the unwritten rule to stay out of sight when Edward Harrington was present. Sophie had dealt with rude patrons before, but something about Edward's harsh treatment of the staff, especially the young barista, ignited a spark within her. Raised by a single mother who instilled that respect wasn't a privilege tied to wealth, but a fundamental right for all, she felt compelled to act. Holding a tray of steaming cappuccinos in the corner, Sophie took a deep breath and stepped forward. The shop seemed to pause as she approached Edward's table. The other servers watched in dread. Challenging him was unthinkable. Yet Sophie didn't falter. She placed the tray on a nearby table and stood tall, her eyes locking with his, fearless. She calmly stated that his manner of addressing the staff was intolerable. The room fell into a stunned hush. Edward, briefly taken aback, stared at her in disbelief. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to him that way. His face tightened as he readied a sharp retort, but Sophie's voice held steady. She reminded him that every cup of coffee came from someone striving to do their best, that errors occur, and that dignity shouldn't be a privilege for the rich. She noted, not with anger but with honesty, that his actions reflected more on him than the coffee ever could. Each word landed with quiet strength. The patrons, once cowering, now gazed at Sophie with admiration. Edward's face reddened, but instead of erupting, he grew quiet. Something in Sophie's tone, firm, respectful, yet unyielding, disarmed him. For the first time in years, he faced not fear, but someone who stood firm without disrespecting him. The room stayed tense, all awaiting his reaction. Then, in a barely noticeable shift, Edward leaned back and requested a fresh cup. His tone, though still curt, lacked its earlier malice. Sophie nodded, thanked him for his patience, and returned to the counter with the same poise she'd shown. Over the next weeks, something extraordinary occurred. Edward kept coming to the shop, as always, but his demeanor softened. He remained exacting, precise, but the cruelty vanished. At times he even offered small praises for the service, something no one recalled him doing before. The staff began to ease up on mornings he appeared, and the heavy tension that once gripped the shop faded. Though Edward never openly apologized, everyone knew what sparked the change. One young server had dared to confront him, and in doing so, she'd transformed not just his behavior, but the entire atmosphere of the coffee shop. Sophie never sought praise for her actions. She continued her work, greeting every patron warmly, treating colleagues with care, and facing each day with quiet resilience. But among the staff, she became a legend. Patrons who saw that day still spoke of it, not as a clash, but as the moment someone showed everyone, rich or not, that respect goes both ways. As for Edward, though never the warmest patron, he started leaving larger tips, not from guilt, but perhaps as a subtle nod to the respect he'd been shown. On rare occasions, he'd ask Sophie for suggestions, and when she spoke, he listened. For a man who'd spent years silencing others with intimidation, that was a shift no one would have foreseen. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Tales Stories. These stories remind us of the power of courage, compassion, and standing up for what's right. Before you leave, I have a special request. Comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever seen or faced a moment when someone stood up for justice, even against someone powerful? Your story might uplift someone today. The coffee shop was eerily still that morning, a hush born not of calm, but of apprehension. Every patron spoke in whispers. Servers and baristas moved swiftly yet cautiously, and even the constant buzz of the coffee machine seemed muffled, all due to his presence. At the prime table by the window sat Edward Harrington, a name that sparked both awe and fear in the city. He was a wealthy tycoon notorious not for kindness but for his fiery temper, haughtiness, and unattainable expectations. His arrival in the shop cast a shadow, like a thundercloud dimming the entire space. Everyone knew the tales, how he'd driven workers to tears, shamed supervisors before patrons, and once caused a barista to resign instantly after a single grievance. People dreaded him, and rightly so. If you value compassion, redemption, and the bravery to defend what's just, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Tales Stories. Your encouragement fuels our mission to share these powerful stories